In 1974, a TV show about teenagers in the 1950s became the most watched program in America, and accidentally launched Robin Williams, invented a phrase we still use today, and put a leather jacket in the Smithsonian. Happy Days wasn't supposed to be any of that. It was supposed to be a simple nostalgia sitcom that nobody asked for. Today we're counting down 10 weird facts about Happy Days, the show that defined a decade while being set in a completely different one. Hit subscribe so you never miss what's coming, and stick around for number 1, because the most famous character on the show almost never wore his leather jacket, not even once. Number 10, a suicidal teenager called the studio asking for Fonzie. At the height of Happy Days' popularity, a call came through to Paramount Studios from a teenage boy who was contemplating suicide. And he didn't ask for a producer, a counselor, or a crisis line. He asked for Fonzie, because Fonzie was the person he trusted, the person he believed would understand. Henry Winkler took the call, not an assistant, not a producer. Winkler himself picked up the phone and talked to a kid in crisis, as himself, not as the character, and stayed on the line until the boy was okay. We grew up watching Fonzie as the coolest man in any room. The real Henry Winkler turned out to be something more than that. The show was set in the 1950s. That phone call was about something permanent. Number 9, Robin Williams won the role by sitting on a chair upside down. By season 5, Gary Marshall had started taking story suggestions from his 8-year-old son, who had just seen Star Wars and wanted a Martian episode. Marshall, running low on ideas, said yes. The resulting script was described by cast members as unreadable. ABC wanted to throw it out entirely. Marshall fought for it and won. Then they couldn't find anyone to play the alien. Roger Rees was cast first and dropped out. Dom DeLuise rejected the offer. A third actor said no upon reading the script. Rehearsals began that week with no one in the role. Then an unknown comedian named Robin Williams walked into audition. When producers asked him to take a seat, he sat on the chair upside down and won the part on the spot. Williams then filled the role with alien mannerisms he invented entirely himself, drinking through his finger, speaking in reverse, and delivered a performance so electric that Henry Winkler later said he was in the presence of greatness, and his job was simply to get out of the way. The fan mail that followed was so overwhelming that ABC built an entire new sitcom around Williams. Mork and Mindy ran for 4 seasons and launched one of the greatest comedy careers in American entertainment history. It all started with a man sitting on a chair the wrong way up in a Happy Days audition room. Number 8. Henry Winkler was dyslexic the whole time and nobody knew. Henry Winkler played the coolest, most self-assured character on American television for 11 years. He delivered lines with precision. He held a room with complete authority. He made every scene look effortless. And he could not read the scripts that contained those lines without enormous difficulty. Winkler was severely dyslexic throughout the entire run of Happy Days, a condition that wasn't formally diagnosed until he was 31 years old. Years into the show's run, he had developed systems for managing it, memorizing dialogue through repetition, finding workarounds that kept his difficulty invisible from the cast and crew around him. Nobody on set knew the full extent of it. After Happy Days ended, Winkler channeled his experience into writing the Hank Zipser children's book series. 17 books about a boy with learning differences, written so that kids who struggled the way he struggled would have someone to recognize themselves in. The man who played the coolest kid in school spent his whole career quietly carrying one of the most common learning challenges in the world, and then used it to help children for decades after the camera stopped rolling. If you grew up with this show, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. We do this every week for the generation that lived it. Number 7. Ron Howard took the job to dodge the Vietnam draft. Ron Howard was not enthusiastic about Happy Days. By 1973, he had already been on the Andy Griffith Show for 8 seasons. He was looking toward film school at USC, and signing back into another television commitment felt like going backward. He was 20 years old. He had plans. And then the Vietnam War intervened. When the pilot for Happy Days was being filmed, going to film school wouldn't have saved Howard from the draft. To stay in America, Howard had to prove he was working a job that kept at least 30 other people in business, and the lead role in a TV show qualified. So he took it, not because he believed in the project, but because the alternative was a draft notice. He signed the contract. He showed up. President Nixon ended the draft just after the pilot was filmed. The actor who didn't want to be there stayed anyway. The show he took to avoid Vietnam sitcom ran for 11 seasons and launched his directorial career. He didn't choose Happy Days. Happy Days chose him, and the US government made sure he couldn't say no. Number 6. The Fonz was terrified of his own motorcycle. Here is the detail that reframes every scene we ever watched of Fonzie coolly mounting his bike and riding off into the Milwaukee sunset. Although Fonzie loved motorcycles, Henry Winkler was terrified of them, not mildly uncomfortable, terrified.
I wrote it really for 17 seconds in the beginning.
Winkler almost crashed the motorcycle the first time he tried to ride it on set, and subsequently never rode it during the entire 11-year run of the series. Not once. Most of the scenes of Fonzie riding were shot with the bike attached to a platform being pulled by a truck. Every time we watched Fonzie glide down a Milwaukee street, sunglasses on, leather jacket perfect, the picture of mechanical mastery, we were watching a terrified man on a motorized platform being towed by a truck he couldn't see. The character who defined cool for an entire decade could not ride the one thing most associated with his coolness. He managed it for 11 seasons without any of us noticing. That is either the greatest acting achievement in television history or the greatest production trick, probably both. Number 5. ABC banned the leather jacket, so Gary Marshall got sneaky. The single most iconic piece of clothing in 1970s television almost never made it on screen. ABC executives didn't want Fonzie in leather, convinced it would make him look like a criminal. During the entire first season, Winkler wore 2 different windbreaker jackets instead, one of which was green, a cool greaser in a green windbreaker. The network genuinely thought this was fine. Gary Marshall fought back creatively. The compromise reached was that Fonzie could wear leather only in scenes with his motorcycle. Marshall's response was to write the motorcycle into every scene, every single one. If Fonzie appeared on screen, there was a motorcycle nearby, because that was the only way to keep the jacket. Eventually, ABC relented entirely. The original gray windbreaker was thrown in the garbage. The leather jacket that replaced it ended up in the Smithsonian Institution's permanent collection at the National Museum of American History. From a green windbreaker destined for the bin to a national treasure in Washington, D.C. That is a television arc. Number 4. They almost renamed the show. Both stars said absolutely not. By the mid-1970s, Fonzie was everywhere. Lunchboxes, t-shirts, magazine covers, action figures. He was more famous than the show containing him, so with the kind of logic that makes complete business sense and almost no other kind, the network considered renaming the show Fonzie's Happy Days. Both Ron Howard and Henry Winkler shut it down immediately. Howard threatened to break his contract if it happened, saying his ego would not allow him to be in a show called Fonzie's Happy Days. And Winkler, the man who would have benefited most from the rename, was equally firm. He told ABC directly, "If you do that, it is an insult to everybody I'm working with. I live in the family, and that's why I'm successful. I'm asking you, if you never listen to me again, leave it alone." The network listened. The title stayed. The man who could have had his name on the marquee refused to put it there out of respect for the people around him. That does not happen often in Hollywood. It happened here. Number 3. The Chuck Cunningham just vanished. Nobody ever explained it. If you watched Happy Days from the very beginning, you remember Chuck Cunningham, Richie's older brother, played by Rick Carrot in the pilot, then recast as Gavin O'Herlihy, then recast again as Randolph Roberts. And then, after the season 2 Christmas episode, simply gone. No explanation, no goodbye episode, no mention of where he went. He was there, and then he wasn't. And the show continued as though he had never existed. O'Herlihy grew frustrated with simply bouncing a basketball in his limited screen time and quit halfway through the first season. His replacement lasted barely longer. Gary Marshall eventually explained that Fonzie was filling the older brother role, and that relationship was what was working, so Chuck was quietly erased. The proof of how completely? At the conclusion of the entire series, Mr. Cunningham declared how proud he was of his 2 kids, referring only to Richie and Joni. A son disappeared from a family sitcom, and the father eventually confirmed he only had 2 children. TV Tropes named the phenomenon after him. Chuck Cunningham became so thoroughly written out of existence that the show forgot he was ever there. Number 2. Jacket ended up in the Smithsonian, right next to the Star-Spangled Banner. In 1980, Henry Winkler received a call from the National Museum of American History at the Smithsonian Institution. They wanted Fonzie's leather jacket for their permanent collection. Not a replica, the actual jacket worn during the series. They wanted to place it alongside the Star-Spangled Banner, the original Kermit the Frog, Dorothy's ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz, and Abraham Lincoln's top hat. Winkler donated it. A costume from a sitcom about a fictional greaser in 1950s Milwaukee was deemed significant enough to sit in permanent company with some of the most important artifacts in American history, and it belongs there because Fonzie wasn't just a TV character, he was the embodiment of a very specific idea about coolness, loyalty, and working class dignity that an entire generation grew up measuring itself against. The Smithsonian decided that meant something, and looking back at everything that show meant to us, they were right. Number 1. The show was born from a pilot nobody wanted. Happy Days didn't begin in 1974. It began in 1972 as a pilot episode buried inside ABC's anthology series Love American Style. Ron Howard was already playing Richie Cunningham. Fonzie didn't exist yet. The network watched it, shrugged, and passed. ABC didn't feel the 1950s would fly, so the pilot sat on a shelf while everyone moved on. Then George Lucas made American Graffiti, the 1973 film, set in 1962, soaked in early rock and roll, featuring a young Ron Howard, became a massive hit and ignited a nationwide wave of 1950s nostalgia that nobody at ABC had anticipated. The off-Broadway production of Grease was gaining steam at the same time. Suddenly, the 1950s were everywhere. ABC went back to the shelf. The show that the network had rejected as unmarketable became the #1 program in America. The executives who said the 1950s wouldn't fly spent the rest of the decade riding that exact wave straight to the bank. And there you have it. 10 facts about the show that turned 1950s Milwaukee into the most comforting place on American television, and gave us a character so real that a kid in crisis called a studio in Hollywood just to talk to him. Happy Days wasn't just a sitcom, it was where we went when the world got too loud. Subscribe for more deep dives into the shows and films that raised us. We'll see you in the next one.